You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from my studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today is July the 23rd, 204th day of the year. Just 161 days remain the year is over with. Holidays and observances. National Gorgeous Grandma Day. National Vanilla Ice Cream Day. Sprinkle Day. Peanut Butter and Chocolate Day. World Surgeons Day. If you've got dry eyes and parched mouth and your joints ache, basically a silent struggle against the body's own defenses. National Women Touched by Addiction Day. Hot Enough For You Day. International Yada 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 Day. It's an extension of the iconic Seinfeld episode that made Yada 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 a household substitute for blah blah blah. National Zookeepers Week. Jensen's Feasting. That's the goes on the 27th. That's the Ghent, Belgium festival. Draws people from all walks of life. Celebrated to honor Ghent's rich cultural heritage and promote unity among its people. The city buzzes with energy as its streets fill with music and food and performances. It's touted as a time when the locals and the visitors come together to enjoy 10 days of non-stop entertainment. The festival turns the historic city center into a lively playground. Every corner offers something exciting to discover. It began Friday, July 18th, and goes on through Sunday the 27th. And then we have the Galway International Arts Festival in Ireland. Started on the 14th, goes through the 27th. Then we've got the Royal Welsh Show. It's a celebration that draws thousands to the heart of mid-Wales. Showcase the best in agriculture, lost culture, and rural life. You see an exciting mix of livestock competitions, forestry, craft, countryside sports, not to mention a bustling food and drink scene. Then you got the Tour de France, which started on the 5th and goes through the 27th. Then you got the Festival of British Archaeology. That started on the 19th and goes through the August 3rd. Then you've got the Big Butterfly Count, which allows you to monitor the environmental vitality by tallying butterflies. National Moth Week. It's where you can sign up for an event or a citizen project during Moth Week. Get involved. Take and post photos and get a look at the interesting varieties of moths out there. I saw one yesterday as big as my hand. I'm not sure what kind it was. National Parent and Gifted Children Week. Everybody Deserves a Massage Week. And famous people born on this date: Woody Harrelson, Daniel Radcliffe, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Monica Lewinsky, Catherine Hahn, and Slash. We've met him several times. Never let go of that hat. Alrighty. Let's see what's in the news for today. Well, Brian Kohlberger's coming face to face with the parents of the Idaho students he's confessed to killing. The investigative reporter who's been following the story has gone into a breakdown of what to expect. He's entered a written confession and pled guilty on July 1st to the November 2022 murders of 4 University of Idaho students. That was done in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. Today is the first opportunity for the loved ones of Madison Logan, Kaylee Goncalves, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapman to address Kohlberger directly in court. And under this plea deal, he faces 4 consecutive life sentences plus an additional 10 years without the possibility of parole. Now, had they been given concurrently, they'll all be served at the same time. Giving them consecutively means he serves one after the other. Prosecutors requested a 99-year no-contact order to bar Kohlberger from contacting victims' families through 2124, that is. And Judge Stephen Hippler removed a long-standing gag order following his guilty plea, though much of the case documentation does remain sealed. But as I say, they're going to get a chance to address him directly. Well, Senate committee has said the Pentagon needs a major reform. A generational opportunity to reform the Pentagon is now here, they say, and it's time we did it. The military has become over the years something of a, frankly, a joke. I've seen soldiers who couldn't run if somebody was shooting at them with a cannon. When I was in, we ran 5 miles a day, rain or shine, in the jungle heat. There'd be uproar today if they were required to do that. After meeting with President Trump, a Republican in a key House battleground announces major decisions over Fox and Friends. GOP is breathing a sigh of relief as Representative Michael Lawler, Republican of New York, commits to defend crucial swing district in the 2026 midterms after he had a meeting with President Trump. During an interview with Brian Kilmeade, he said, "There's no question Kathy Hochul is the worst governor in America. 2026, she needs to be defeated, but after months of deliberating over this, I've decided the right thing to do for my family and my district is to run for re-election in an area where you have those support making the Intifada International, defeating a former governor who was running for mayor of New York City. That is really something that needs to be considered." Well, we've got another disappearance. The mother of a missing Wisconsin graduate student has pleaded for her daughter's return. A 22-year-old graduate student went missing early Sunday morning in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Eliot Hines, last seen walking near the waterfront right before 3:30 in the morning on Sunday. That's according to the La Crosse Police Department. There's multiple lawsuits have taken place that reveals a nationwide pattern of educators deliberately concealing students' gender identity changes from the family. There is a movement in our nation's public schools to liberate the students from their parents' control. Across the country, lawsuits are mounting as schools are found to secretly facilitate the gender transition of minors without informing the parents. According to these suits, this is not just a pedagogical overreach. It's a gross violation of parental rights and a dangerous assumption that strangers know better than mothers and fathers what's best for their children. Well, The View, which touts itself as the end-all be-all in TV programs, host Sonny Hostin is warning the country that the cancellation of Stephen Colbert's show could lead to the dismantling of our Constitution. CBS says, look, we couldn't afford to keep doing it. It costs $100 million a year for his show, and he makes 20. and he doesn't have the ratings to justify even the 20 he gets. China has control over 80% of the battery materials crucial to U.S. defense equipment. That report has just been released. Defense-minded groups are urging streamlined permitting and ally shoring to counter Beijing's dominance in the lithium and the graphite markets. Well, Prince of Darkness Ozzy Osbourne has just died at age 76. Closes the curtain on what's been being called a legendary career. Well, Angel Reese, who thinks she's the end-all be-all in female basketball, is being mocked for her turnover spree in the same game where she makes WNBA history. She's being ridiculed on social media. Committed a game-leading 9 turnovers in the Chicago Sky's blowout 91-68 loss to the Minnesota Lynx on Tuesday night. That's also the same night she became the first player in WNBA history to record multiple streaks of 10 games with a double-double. With 11 points, 11 rebounds, and 9 turnovers. Some jokers urged that Reese was on a triple-double watch late in the game. Well, doctors are now discussing the effects of the drug Ambien after Hunter Biden said his father was on that drug during the debate. He said his father had been having trouble sleeping, so his doctors put him on Ambien. Doctors are chiming in after Hunter Biden claimed that sleeping pills could have contributed to his father's apparent cognitive struggles during the 2024 presidential debate. Former first son made the statement during an interview with YouTube host Andrew Callahan that was released Monday. His father's performance in the first presidential debate on June 27, 2024 was described as disastrous and ultimately led to Joe Biden dropping out of the race. And of course, Hunter blamed the whole thing on the use of Ambien. Now, the Department of Justice stepped in and fired Alina Habba's court-appointed replacement for U.S. Attorney in New Jersey. Alina Habba, who had been Trump's private attorney, was appointed to that position, and the court said, nope, we want this one over here. It was actually Habba's assistant. Attorney generals accused rogue judges of threatening Trump's authority in the battle over Habba's replacement. Manhattan bomb plot has been foiled as feds charge a New York man with building and hiding IEDs across the city. He allegedly placed IEDs on subway tracks and residential rooftops. Michael Gunn, 55 of Inwood, was charged Tuesday with manufacturing at least 7 improvised explosive devices using chemicals he bought online. That's according to the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, Jay Clayton. Clayton said the safety of New York is paramount. It's funny the feds care about that and the locals don't. According to the allegations, Gunn built these explosive devices, stored them on a rooftop in Soho, and then threw one onto the subway tracks, putting countless lives at risk. Luckily, according to Clayton, nobody was harmed, but it could have been a real tragedy for New York. According to Sean Hannity, Democratic delusion is off the charts. They seem to think that by getting rid of the misogyny that The View keeps talking about, Democrats can win again. And they'll all be right with the world. Well, the largest great white shark ever recorded in the Atlantic has been spotted off a popular beach town. This predator's named Contender. And since he was tagged in January, he has traveled 1,000 miles for what sharks view as a lunch. Has recently tracked several dozen miles off Nantucket, Massachusetts, about 100 miles south of Boston and 30 miles from Cape Cod. The island is a well-known tourist hotspot. Researchers estimate contenders about 32 years old. And while great whites typically live between 30 and 40 years, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration says that some can live up to 70. All right. Louisiana pastor said he was fired from a library job for objecting to use trans pronouns. Over 30 pastors have rallied behind this fired employee, called for his immediate reinstatement. Luke Ash, lead pastor of Stevendale Baptist Church in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, was a library technician at the East Baton Rouge Parish Library when he was fired on July 10th. According to him, he was in conversation with a co-worker on July 7th about a new staffer she was training. New staff member, he said, was a biological female, preferred to be called by male pronouns. And he said, I refused to use those preferred pronouns. Next day, I was reprimanded by my supervisor and had a reference. And Thursday morning, I was fired. According to WBRZ, he was given a copy of the library's inclusive policy, which says it fosters an environment where all employees are welcomed, accepted, and respected. Right to be addressed by their chosen name and pronouns. Well, it's becoming a little silly. Well, it's now been revealed how a 9-year-old Canadian girl, whose father was charged with her murder, was drowned, according to authorities. Elena Flatelin's father was charged with murder after falsely reporting she was kidnapped by a man in a white van. Her death has been ruled a homicide, according to New York State Police. Dr. Michael Sikorica performed the autopsy at Glens Falls Hospital on July 21st. And while final lab results aren't pending, the cause of death was listed as asphyxia due to drowning. And the manner of death was determined to be a homicide. Her father, 45-year-old Luciano Fratelin, was facing charges of second-degree murder, concealment of a human corpse, after he allegedly fabricated a phony kidnapping story. According to investigators, Melina and her father crossed the U.S. from Canada July 11th when it was supposed to be a vacation. The surveillance showed the pair in Saratoga Springs about 5:30 p.m. on July 19th. And she spoke to her mother by phone an hour later. 9:58 p.m., he called 911 from Lake George, claimed his daughter had been abducted. Less than 16 hours later, her body was found in a shallow pond in Ticonderoga, about 30 miles away. Authorities said there's no evidence supporting his claims of an abduction involving a suspicious van. So we'll have to see how that plays out. An actor who lost family members to Intifada urges Mamdani to help New York City Jews feel safe. An Arab Jewish stage actor, Ariel Stachel, urged New York City mayoral candidate Zoran Mamdani to lean into the Jewish community and build coalitions to combat rising anti-Semitism. Weeks after warning that too often hate's disguised as a virtue. And he's right. Well, the Maine Democratic governor laughed off questions about when confronted about alleged past cocaine use. She didn't want to discuss it. She's going to strut and show everybody how she's better than anybody else. Senate's voted to consider former Trump lawyer for lifetime appointment as an appeals court judge. Former Trump lawyer Emil Bovee advances to final confirmation vote after Democrats throw weight against the nomination. Democrats have said, if Trump suggests it, we're against it automatically. Well, the boater slammed his craft into a historic aircraft carrier, left $100,000 worth of damages before getting the hell out of Dodge. Well, Roman Empire's go-to condiment apparently was fish oil. We're discovering a lot about the Roman policies, especially about their food. When George Clooney is staying silent after Hunter Biden blasted him for an op-ed that helped end the Biden campaign. You know, Joe Biden stepping down as candidate end Hunter Biden's lucrative art career, membership on various boards around the world, and also end his easy access to that little white powder. Well, the Florida Attorney General has invited people to alert his office if their ex is in the U.S. illegally. He said, we'd be happy to assist in getting the hell out of the country. From domestic abuser to deported loser, Department of Homeland Security quipped when sharing the Florida Attorney General's post. Well, the defensor on Team USA, who knelt to protest a transgender competitor, is, in fact, her kneeling went viral. Has been supported by President Trump's order. Man been hospitalized for a shark bite in South Florida. Got him sent to the hospital. This was at Hollywood Beach, a South Florida beach. Happened about 3 p.m. near the 4100 block of Ocean Drive at Hollywood Beach. Had an injury to his upper torso. Well, DEI efforts were rebranded at 2 red state colleges to get around Trump's orders, staffers have admitted. It's a chess game, a coordinator at the University of Tennessee says about their efforts to escape scrutiny. Staff at 2 of Tennessee's most prominent universities, Vanderbilt, University of Tennessee, were caught on undercover recordings admitting to rebranding their diversity, equity, and inclusion programs to sidestep the Republican-led bans. Despite state and federal orders aimed at dismantling DEI initiatives, school officials described a deliberate strategy to rename, repackage, and preserve these controversial programs under new labels like access and engagement, belongings, and community. The left is, they may go, but they're going kicking and screaming. House Democrats admitted immigrants are needed for redistricting purposes. That's how you hijack democracy, according to one conservative reacting to the video that was filmed and released on X. That's what Lyndon Johnson said about bringing in anybody possible. We bring them up, we shove them money into their laps, and they'll vote Democrat forever. The Florida teens have a dangerous social media challenge that has police warning parents. Juveniles are participating in risky social media trends that could end in tragedy. They A group of miners took part in the door kick challenge, a social media trend aimed at frightening homeowners. This came out of Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. 5 juvenile suspects were walking around a neighborhood in Riverview, Florida. Two of them approached the house. One of them, wearing a ski mask, kicked the front door and fired an airsoft gun. Then they ran. Well, if homeowners fire back, they won't be using airsoft guns. Florida man arrested for allegedly threatening to kill anybody on Epstein's client list with a machete. He was arrested for making those cutting remarks. Well, the U.S. and China are weaponizing drones and code and biotech for the next great conflict. Well, the news agency says it's Gaza journalists suffering health woes as the union warns they're going to die if there's no intervention. AFP freelancers report constant headaches and dizziness and inability to work as the food crisis deepens in the war-torn territory. Well, maybe they should get the hell out of there. But that would be too easy. Yeah. Tom Homan has dismissed Hunter Biden's rant about immigration, calling him the former first drug addict. Well, Cove has been claiming he was the #1 nighttime host. Of course, the numbers show it was gut feel. All right. Now let's turn to our main stories. You know, we've been talking about a lot of strange things. Yesterday, we talked about the Gurur incident when the Israelis hijacked 10,000 weapons that was being sent to Syria, which certainly changed the dynamics of the War of Independence in 1948. Well, there's been a lot of very bizarre things that I've uncovered in my attempts to bring you different stories. Let's talk about the Flat Earth Blueprint. Now, I'm sure most of you have never heard of that. And if you looked at anything from International Space Station, you know the world is actually round, or at least oval. But in 1892, an unusual document entered the fringe of American science. A carefully drawn, intricately labeled map of the square stationary Earth, published by a man named Alexander Gleason. Unlike globes being introduced into the classrooms at that point in time, this map showed a flat, square-shaped Earth with the North Pole at the center and Antarctica forming an outer ice wall. Now, this was based on Gleason's interpretation of biblical cosmology and alternative physics. It came with a thick explanatory index describing his beliefs of how the sun and the moon and the stars circled above a motionless, unmoving Earth. But you might ask how or what made this especially strange. It wasn't just a novelty. For a time, this map made its way into educational materials and scientific experiments. In some rural and religious communities, it was even used as an instructional diagram, particularly in navigation discussions and Bible-based geography. And before you think he's just another nut job, he was not a random eccentric. He was a civil engineer with a background in rail systems and industrial measurement. Precisely the kind of person expected to understand motion and curvature and distances. But he remained fully committed to a geocentric model. He argued Earth was stationary and the centrifugal force was a myth. He believed the motions of the stars and the planets can all be explained by a rotating celestial dome, and his map reflected this. a unique combination of astronomy and scripture and skepticism of modern science. He patented his design and actually published a lengthy volume entitled "Is the Bible from Heaven? Is the Earth a Globe?" That book combined flat Earth theory with a religious doctrine and critiques in Newtonian physics. Well, as you might guess, his ideas are quickly rejected by mainstream science. But the Smithsonian Institution quietly got a copy of the map and the accompanying literature in its archives. You might ask why. Well, his work didn't emerge in a vacuum. It reflected a genuine cultural divide in 19th century America between rising science institutions and a deeply religious public unaware of and unsure of modern astronomy's implications. The Smithsonian researchers later cataloged it as a case study of pseudo-scientific belief, particularly its role in anti-modern education movements. And this map was actually cited in obscure legal cases, fringe science publications, and even early radio navigation debates. Several explorers and inventors referenced it in journals, less as a belief and more as a competing framework during a time when access to precise global data was still limited. Now, despite the map's now dismissed premises, it played a role in an early 20th century attempts to prove or disprove the Earth's curvature. Some researchers cited his layout during light refraction experiments and canal leveling measurements, including tests on long stretches of water meant to detect the curve of the Earth. His square Earth grid was said to offer a simpler baseline for geometry, didn't rely on spherical math. Of course, the results never backed up his model, but the fact that it was used at all adds a strange layer to the history of this belief. Now today, his map lives in niche conspiracy circles and digital flat Earth communities, but its original print copies remain rare collector's items. Smithsonian's archival notes show that as recently as the mid-20th century, the map was still being requested by independent researchers, including those involved in alternative cartography and religious prophecy modeling and anti-spaceflight publications. In fact, some folks even claim Gleason's layout explains anomalies in early NASA footage. And that's a claim that's been widely debunked, but when it keeps the map floating in the same internet circles as moon landing denial and hollow Earth theory. Now, this map is not just a bizarre relic. Oh no, it's a reminder that belief and science often exist on separate tracks. Sometimes belief gets published and patented and passed down before science has a chance to catch up and correct it. It also shows how easy it is for outdated models to gain momentum, not through evidence, but through cultural doubt and emotional resonance. Gleason's diagram offers the world that has fixed edges, immovable certainty, and spiritual simplicity. It's an age of rapid change and scientific revolution. It's oddly comforting to many. Now, the map, square as it might be, still sparks controversy and curiosity over 100 years later. It did ask the big questions, even if it got all the answers wrong. Well, from the possibility that the Earth is square, let's talk about a vanishing submarine. It was May 1968. The USS Scorpion, a skipjack-class nuclear-powered submarine, was headed back to Norfolk, Virginia. It had had a 3-month deployment in the Mediterranean, had 99 crew members and 2 nuclear torpedoes. Her final radio message, which was sent May 21st, stated she was tracking a Soviet naval group near the Azores. And then she went radio silent. Never made it home. For 5 days, the Scorpion was listed as overdue. And on June 5th, 1968, the U.S. government declared her and her crew presumed lost. Now, at that point in time, the Navy offered little clarity. The official explanation cited unknown mechanical failure and left families and the public with unanswered questions. No full explanation was ever shared. No major memorial was ever held. The Cold War backdrop made the event too politically charged to expose fully. But behind the scenes, investigators are already putting together a more complex story. Now, in October 1968, after months of using acoustic triangulation and deep-sea submersibles, the Navy located the wreck. It was 10,000 feet down, about 400 miles southwest of the Azores. Photographs showed the submarine was in pieces, its forward hull destroyed, the sails separated from the main body, and its row section mostly intact. Internally, the Navy convened a court of inquiry, and they came up with several competing theories. Number one, torpedo may have detonated inside the sub, either due to a malfunction and accidental activation, which triggered, of course, a catastrophic chain reaction. There could have been a mechanical failure, such as a propulsion or hydraulic system malfunction, and that would have led to flooding and implosion. But there were a few more obscure suggestions made as well, probably passed among intelligence and naval circles, which pointed to possible Soviet interference. Former Soviet officers later hinted their Navy had been tracking the Scorpion closely during that same window of time. But despite all the theories, the final report did not offer a definitive cause. The exact sequence of events has never been publicly confirmed. Maybe the most unsettling part of the Scorpion story lies in what it carried. 2 Mark 45 torpedoes, each armed with a W-34 nuclear warhead capable of yields up to 11 kilotons, which is comparable to the bomb dropped at Hiroshima. And to this day, as far as anybody knows, those warheads remain submerged inside the wreck. Now, the U.S. Navy maintains the environmental risk is minimal due to protective casings and depth, but independent scientists and arms control experts remain concerned corrosion, even over decades, could pose a serious ecological threat to the future. Now, the Scorpion wasn't the only submarine to vanish in 1968. That same year, the Israeli submarine Dakar disappeared in January. The Soviet sub K-129 sank in March of that year. The French submarine Minerva was launched in May, just days before the Scorpion disappeared. Now, 4 submarines, each from a different Cold War power, vanished within a 5-month time period. The odds of such a cluster of disappearances being coincidental is still being debated. Some believe underwater clashes, secret operations, or even hidden confrontations might have played a role in one or more of those disappearances. Well, in the 1970s, the CIA launched Project Azorian. It was a covert mission to raise this sunken Soviet sub K-129, which of course highlighted the immense value placed on recovering lost nuclear technology. No such mission has ever been publicly acknowledged for the Scorpion, of course. Some researchers believe plans may have been considered or even partially executed under deep secrecy. But to this day, the U.S. government has continually denied any recovery efforts were made on the Scorpion. Now, the Scorpion incident remains one of the most troubling and unexplained events of Cold War naval history. It actually touches on many larger themes: the dangers of nuclear weapons lost at sea, the culture of secrecy surrounding military accidents, and the enduring grief of families who never received full closure. Now, in 2018, marking 50 years since the disaster, the Navy released additional documents related to the Scorpion inquiry. Unfortunately, much of the content was redacted. No definitive explanations ever surfaced. Now, if you want additional investigative sources, look at the Navy Court of Inquiry report from 1968, which was partially declassified in 1993 and 2018. Then there was a book called Blind Man's Bluff, the untold story of America's submarine espionage by Sherry Sontag and Christopher Drew. Then in the National Archives, Defense Technical Information Center, there are submarine incident summaries. There's FOIA releases concerning nuclear weapons launched at sea. As you might guess, the Navy doesn't usually trumpet those incidents. And there's been interviews of former Soviet naval officers and Cold War oral history records, which gives an entirely different story than we've been led to believe. Now, the USS Scorpion wasn't just simply lost. It vanished under a fog of geopolitical tension, naval secrecy, and technological risk. And the silence surrounding its sinking certainly speaks volumes. There are 99 men, American servicemen, remain entombed in the deep, their final moments unexplained. Somewhere, far below the surface, the sea holds what's left of the truth. But so far, it's not revealed any answers. Well, there's long been stories about what might be referred to as time slips, where somebody today can round a corner and step into yesterday or even tomorrow. One of the most well-known of these is known as the Versailles time slip. It all began one bright summer morning in 1901. Two well-educated Englishwomen, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, set out for a day trip to the Palace of Versailles in France. Now, their stroll through this historic estate began very uneventfully. What followed to become one of the most peculiar and hotly debated time slip cases ever recorded. Now, these were not eccentric wanderers or mystics prone to fantasy. Moberly was the first principal of St. Hugh's College in Oxford. Jourdain, her assistant at the time, would later take over as principal herself. They had reputations that were very serious and scholarly, and until then, completely devoid of scandal or exaggeration. But what they claimed to have experienced on that August afternoon would echo across the decades and challenge the boundaries of time and memory and perception. Now, they were walking through the Petit Trianon, a secluded estate given to Marie Antoinette. The atmosphere, as they walked, seemed to shift around them. They said the air grew thick, sunlight dimmed. Suddenly they found themselves surrounded not by other tourists, but by men wearing tricorn hats and women in powdered wigs and period gowns and guards dressed in clothing long out of date. And even more unsettling were the unfamiliar pathways and bridges and structures that didn't match any map of modern Versailles. Even the layout had changed. And they began to experience a deep sense of unease. They later described seeing a woman sketching alone on the grass with features hauntingly similar to portraits of Marie Antoinette. And though this encounter only lasted a few minutes, both women were shaken, unsure of what they had just witnessed. When they inquired later about what they had seen, guides and locals insisted that many of the people and buildings described simply did not exist. Some, they were told, had been part of the Versailles landscape since before the French Revolution. Well, Moberly and Jourdain wrote down their experiences separately and then cross-checked their notes. To their astonishment, their descriptions aligned. Rather than dismiss the incident as imagination, they spent years researching the history of Versailles in detail. They tracked down obscure references, cross-referenced floor plans, and identified people and places that had long been forgotten. In 1911, under the pseudonym Elizabeth Morrison and Frances Lamont, they published a thorough account of what had happened, entitled An Adventure. Now, this book caused quite a stir, as you might guess, not just among spiritualists and paranormal enthusiasts, but in academic and historical circles. This wasn't a vague tale of ghostly figures. It was a detailed, historically accurate, and unusually grounded account. Now, despite the ridicule they faced, the Montbéliard Jourdain never retracted their claims. Their story stayed consistent for the rest of their lives, and they never attempted to profit from it. And they continued their academic careers quietly, avoided the spotlight. Now, naturally, the world began offering explanations. Some believed they'd walked into a literal time slip, a moment when the past and the present briefly collided. Others thought they'd encountered kind of a residual haunting where emotionally powerful events had imprinted themselves onto a place and replayed like a recording. Psychological interpretations suggested a shared hallucination or mutual fantasy, maybe influenced by their interest in history and the eerie ambiance of the gardens. And then, of course, there were the skeptics who accused them of fabrication, though they never found a clear motive for the supposed fabrication. Neither woman gained wealth or fame from the publication of an adventure. But the deeper one dives into the story, the stranger it gets. Later studies confirm that certain paths and buildings described by the women did in fact exist in the 1700s, but had long since vanished. The people they mentioned, at first thought to be invented, or eventually matched to obscure staff members of the French royal court, names so little known that authors would have been unlikely to invent them by chance. Now, over 100 years later, the Montbéliard Jourdain incident remains a landmark case in both paranormal history and academic mystery. Unlike typical ghost sightings or speculative lore, this account involved two respected scholars who documented their experience with discipline and depth. No retractions, no inconsistencies, and certainly no scandal. For some, it's compelling evidence that time may not be as linear or as fixed as we assume. For others, it's a fascinating glimpse into how memory and perception can warp reality. And for all those who read it, it remains a story that lingers, a walk through a garden that somehow slipped out of time. And even today, some visitors to the Petit Trianon report strange feelings, a disorienting stillness, a sense of being watched, or even a sudden shift in atmosphere. None described anything quite as vivid as Montbéliard Jourdain did, but the shadow of their experience still hangs in the air. Now, if you want additional information, you can go to the writing entitled An Adventure by Elizabeth Morrison and Francis Lamont. Those are the pseudonyms of Montbéliard Jourdain. One more time. Reviews and investigations by the British Society for Psychical Research done in the early 20th century. Versailles Palace Archives and pre-revolution layout documentation. Modern psychological analysis of anomalous perception. And their oral and written records from contemporary Versailles visitors and staff. Now you might ask, was it a psychic echo, a glimpse into the past, or just two minds colliding under the weight of history? Whatever it might have been, the Versailles time slip remains an unshakable moment in the annals of the unexplained. Now, there have been other similar occurrences, none as detailed and as first person as this one, but there's been a number of others. So there's a lot of support for the idea that time may not be as fixed as we think it is. Well, from two women walking into the past, let's talk about the Great Molasses Flood cover-up. Oh, that's quite a sticky story. July 15, 1919. North end of Boston was rocked by one of the strangest, most devastating industrial disasters in U.S. history. A giant molasses storage tank, 50 feet tall, holding over 2 million gallons of molasses, burst without warning. And what followed, of course, was total chaos. Tidal wave with thick brown syrup moving at an estimated 35 miles an hour surged through the streets and flattened buildings, ripped steel girders from train tracks, swallowed horses, trapped people in a sticky flood that became nearly impossible to escape. Unknown, 21 people died. Over 150 were injured. The city is left coated with a glistening film that took months to clean up. In some places, molasses stains lasted years. But the real tragedy wasn't just the bizarre nature of the flood, it was what came after that. In the aftermath, the company responsible, United States Industrial Alcohol, scrambled to avoid blame. Public outrage mounted, of course. Reporters asked how such a disaster could happen in the middle of a busy neighborhood. Rather than accept any fault, United States Industrial Alcohol, or USIA, those executives pointed the fingers. They claimed it was sabotage. At the time, anarchist activity and fears of radical bombings were spreading across the U.S. The company, of course, leaned into that fear, asserting that Italian anarchists had deliberately drawn up the tank to strike at capitalism. And, of course, the media jumped on that story. The public hesitated. The narrative began to shift from industrial negligence to a national security threat. And for years, this was the version that a lot of folks accepted. It wasn't until internal memos and engineering records were reviewed during a civil suit that the truth actually came out. Turns out that molasses tank had been poorly constructed from the start. It leaked from day one. Local kids even collected molasses that oozed from its seams. Workers complained regularly the steel was thinner than it should have been, and a man in charge of overseeing its safety, who had no engineering background, had authorized construction without proper inspection. Oh, I'm quite familiar with how inspectors can be bribed. We've got a lot of that going on right here. During legal proceedings, company documents revealed something damning. Executives had falsified inspection reports and failed to conduct proper stress tests. They had known about the leaks and chosen to patch them up with paint, literally to hide the signs of structural failure from view. In other words, that tank was a ticking time bomb, and they did nothing about it. The case became one of the first major class action lawsuits against a private corporation in U.S. history. The year was 1925. The court found the USIA liable and ordered them to pay damages to victims and their families. But by then, the narrative of anarchist sabotage already served its purpose, distracting from negligence long enough for the company to regroup, rebrand, and eventually merge with other industrial giants. Many details of the internal memos and corporate admissions didn't reach the public eye until decades later when investigative historians dug through the company archives and rediscovered the truth behind the flood. Now, the Great Molasses Flood wasn't just a freak accident. It was the direct product of greed, carelessness, and deliberate manipulation of public fear. It serves as a chilling reminder of how easily powerful institutions can obscure responsibility, especially when armed with the right narrative at the right time. And while it sounds like something pulled from fiction, it's all too real. The disaster is still commented on in Boston, though few know the full story behind the headlines. Sometimes the most unbelievable part of history isn't the event itself, it's how long it took for the truth to rise to the surface. Well, we got time for one last story. The hidden industry known as the fancy girls. When people think about slavery in the U.S., they picture rural plantations and cotton fields and people in chains. But in urban centers like New Orleans and Richmond and Charleston and St. Louis, it was another economy that thrived in the shadows. But even more disturbing, we still see a lot of it going on today. The open sale of young, light-skinned, enslaved black women and girls, specifically for sexual use. These women, often referred to as the fancy girls, were groomed and dressed and auctioned off not as laborers, but as property meant for elite white men's private exploitation. Now, New Orleans is one of the largest slave markets in America. Within its bounds, a disturbing subset flourished. Auction houses ran ads, but were coded with unmistakable descriptions like charming octoroon or well-trained quadroon girl, 15 years, didn't just suggest domestic service. They were clear offers of the girls prepped for sexual ownership. These fancy girls were usually teenagers, many with 1/4 or 1/8 African ancestry, products of generations of sexual violence. They had fair skin, light eyes, European features, made them especially valuable in a racist system that fetishized whiteness. Traders dressed them in fine clothes and taught them etiquette and coached them to perform femininity in a way that would command a high price. Harriet Jacobs, who escaped slavery and later became a powerful abolitionist, wrote bluntly about this hidden world in a book called Incidents of the Life of a Slave Girl that came out in 1861. She said there's no shadow of law to protect her from insult or violence or even from death. Henry Bibb, in his 1849 autobiography, remembers seeing young girls paraded in front of bidders, with the price rising at the light of the skin. Mary Armstrong in WPA interviews later recalled, them girls, I seen them cry all night after they was took. Their stories, and a lot of others like them, confirm with the documents and the ads on the Hen app. A deliberate system of grooming and trafficking and sales combined slavery with sexual abuse. Now, what made the fancy girl trade especially vile was it was legal and it was public. The U.S. had no laws against selling enslaved women for sex. In fact, buyers are often powerful men, judges or mayors and merchants, even the clergy. Because enslaved people are considered property, they had no legal standing to resist. Bills of sale often avoided the word concubine or mistress, instead list them as house attendants or personal servants. Everybody in the room knew what was being bought. Price reflected the intent. A fancy girl cost double or triple the price of a strong male laborer, often over $1,500, or in today's money, that's about $50,000. After the Civil War and emancipation, many survivors of this trade faded into silence. Few had the means or safety to tell their stories. Harriet Jacobs was an exception, of course. Most others disappeared into the shadows of American memory. In the early 2000s, as part of California's reparations legislation, companies were required to disclose profits made from slavery. Among them was Aetna, New York Life. These corporations admitted underwriting slave insurance policies, some of which listed girls used for personal use as high-value assets. The records, although damning, are still incomplete. Most of them remain buried and redacted or misclassified. Now, the fancy girl trade wasn't an aberration. Oh no, it was a thriving open market enterprise that combined racism, misogyny, and capitalism into one of the most dehumanizing systems America ever created. Reminds us slavery wasn't only about economic labor, it's also about sexual violence, reproductive control, and systematic breaking up of families. Now, these girls had no voice, no rights, no protection. And there are no monuments standing in their honor. No reparations have been issued. Their names are mostly lost to time, but their stories aren't. If you want more information on the fancy girl trade, you can look at Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl from 1861. Henry Bibb's Narrative of the Life and Adventures of Henry Bibb, 1849. Walter Johnson's Soul by Soul, Life Inside the Antebellum Slave Market. WPA Slave Narratives, you can find it in the Federal Writers Project in the Library of Congress. California Slavery Area Insurance Registry, the AB 1740 Disclosures. At the New York Life Internal Disclosures. Now, this was not a rumor by any means. Oh no, this is American history. Written in the records, buried in archives, and whispered in the memoirs. It's time it came out. On that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk more about some of the strangeness of history. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.